Another day, and look, another player is popping up on the Grizzlies rumor mill in terms of free agency. This time, one and only Draymond Green. He declined his player option for the Golden State Warriors, and ESPN's Woj mentioned the possibility of Draymond Green landing in Memphis. Look, I don't know about that, but we're going to talk about that coming up here. But we also going to talk about OG Anunoby, the latest on the trade rumors there, and we're going to talk about an interesting draft prospect that I think makes a lot of sense for the Grizzlies. Coming up, stay tuned for all that right here, right now on Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host today, Damichael Cole, beat writer right here in Memphis, Tennessee for the Memphis Commercial Appeal. So I want to thank you guys for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies on today and each and every day as well. Make sure you continue to tune in. Make sure you continue to like, review, subscribe, all of those good things, and wherever you're listening to Locked On Grizzlies. We surely appreciate you for tuning in. We appreciate the reviews. We appreciate the comments. We appreciate all of the support from the Locked On Grizzlies viewers. But we got a loaded week coming up for you the rest of this week as we kind of dive in deeper into our draft coverage. But we also got to keep an eye on everything else that's going on around this Grizzlies team, because not only are we getting close to the NBA draft, but NBA free agency is a week away as well. And the official new NBA season starts in a week as well, meaning that trades will be finalized. Trades will be coming into play here soon. Free agents will be changing teams here, as well as the NBA draft. But we're going to talk about all of those different angles on today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies. But I got to start with this latest player in Draymond Green, Golden State Warrior, Grizzlies arch nemesis, Dylan Brooks' arch nemesis more than anything. We'll get to that in a second. But ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski, everyone knows, does great work, one of the best insiders in the business. Basically said in a recent report after Draymond Green declined his player option. I believe it's like $27.5 million to return to the Warriors for one more season and opted for free agency. He mentioned a few teams, contenders, that will possibly be interested in the services of Draymond Green. He mentioned the Phoenix Suns. He mentioned, he mentioned Detroit as, a local landing spot, close to where Draymond is from. I believe he's from Saginaw out there in Michigan. He mentioned the Phoenix Suns. He mentioned, possibly returning to the Golden State Warriors, a couple other teams. But the most important teams that he mentioned to the Locked On Grizzlies viewers is none other than the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, I got some mixed thoughts about this because, quite frankly, let's start with the obvious things. There's two obvious things that I want to point out here. One is it's very likely that Draymond Green returns to Golden State. From the business standpoint of things, I understand this decision for Draymond because, quite frankly, if you watch Draymond play, he's in the mid-30s now, and he ain't getting any younger. So with that being said, you got 1 year left on your contract. If he doesn't play up to his standard next season, he's gone. Jonathan Kuminga, the Warriors got a nice little interesting prospect in that guy, and they could say, hey, all he needs is one more year, and Draymond's gone after that. So from the Draymond Green perspective, I understand this as, hey, yes, I probably won't get a contract where I could earn $27.5 million over the course of 1 year, but you take 3 years, $60 million, potentially, just roughly throwing out numbers, 3 years, $70 million, 3 years, $75 million, where in totality, you're getting more money over time and you're getting more financial security for the long term whereas this 1-year deal opting into the player option of $27.5 million only secures his future for one season. So I understand it from that perspective of Draymond Green. But here's the other thing. You may be wondering, why am I even entertaining this rumor? Because what you're going to learn in about a couple minutes is I don't really like this idea. I've seen some people in the Grizzlies fan base entertaining it, throwing out possible trade ideas and all of that, but I don't think this is really a fit. But we got to talk about it. And I'm going to tell you why we got to talk about it. It's because Woj said it. Not just because Woj said it, but it's because Woj said it. Let me explain, because you're probably like, Damichael, what are you talking about? Well, you could say the three biggest insiders who probably break the most news in the NBA right now are Adrian Wojnarowski, Shams Charania, and Chris Haynes. Mark Stein as well, I would put in that conversation. Those are probably the big four, the Mount Rushmore right now, as you will, as it comes to NBA insiders. There are many more who do great work, but those four guys usually are first for the most part. Woj, in his case, is usually first a lot of times with the Grizzlies. Woj is very connected to the Memphis Grizzlies. This is something I know. This ain't me just talking. He is pretty much one of the main sources in terms of he gets a lot of Grizzly stuff. So when I heard Woj say that the Grizzlies are a potential suitor, that stands out to me, because if any other insider said it, probably brush it off. And we'd be starting this Locked On Grizzlies episode with what we're going to be talking about in the second segment, and that's OG Anunoby. But before we get to that, we got to talk about Draymond Green, because Woj said it, and Woj is very connected to things going on around the Grizzlies in terms of what players they like and things like that. So with that being said, I think that makes the idea very real of the Grizzlies entertaining the idea, not the Grizzlies going after him, full force, but just them entertaining the idea of bringing on Draymond Green. Now, on to what I think about this pretty much, and it's just I don't see the fit with Draymond Green in Memphis, and quite frankly, I don't think the Grizzlies should do this. For one, you'd have to acquire Draymond Green through a sign and trade. We've talked a lot extensively about sign and trades over the past couple weeks, because we've talked about it pretty much as it pertains to the small forward position, which is much more important than what Draymond Green would bring to this team. You're talking about a guy who plays power forward, who plays small ball center, great defensive anchor. I mean, you talk about a defensive lineup with Draymond Green and Jaren Jackson Jr., you're getting great things. But I've constantly said this in other ways. The Grizzlies do not need to add more guys to this lineup who can't shoot the ball. Right now, the only thing this team should be prioritizing adding in that starting lineup is above average shooting. Ja Morant, as great as he is as a player, I think it's fair to say you cannot depend on him right now to go into next season and shoot 36% from three-point range. You can depend on Desmond Bane to give you 40%. You can say Jaren Jackson Jr. is going to knock down a couple triples a night and give you 35% maybe. You can depend on those things, but you can't depend on Ja Morant to be an efficient three-point shooter at this stage of his career. That's why you have to hit on that small forward position. And that's why you don't say, hey, sure, we already have a lineup that doesn't, isn't a great shooting lineup. So let's go out and get Draymond Green, who, by the way, has played with two of the greatest shooters in NBA history. And that's kind of helped, his value from that standpoint. And that's the other thing. Draymond isn't really a fit in Memphis to me. He's a fit on other teams, other than Golden State. I think the whole, thing with, if you take him out of Golden State, he lacks value. I think that's incorrect. But I think there are certain situations he's just not a fit, and Memphis is one of those situations. Sure, from the standpoint of he is a guy who can help make the players better. Defensively, the Grizzlies would be better. But overall, you still have that vacancy at small forward. And then you're going to have to do a sign and trade. Again, I just roughly laid out the numbers. So we're talking, let's say $23 million a year is what he gets. 3 years, $69 million. The numbers are going to have to work for the Grizzlies. So, in order for that to happen, you're talking about departing potentially with Steven Adams, Tyus Jones, and or possibly both of those guys, but Steven Adams or Tyus Jones, or maybe even a Brandon Clark. And I just don't think that's smart business for the Grizzlies at this standpoint. I think Draymond Green, for all things, you can say he's not, the ideal leader in the NBA, but in my mind, he's a leader because he's very fiery. So you have the Jordan Poole thing happen and whatnot, but I think he has pretty good leadership skills from the standpoint of he's very vocal. He challenges his teammates, and teammates respect him. He's won championships at this level, and he's won 4 of them. So I think Draymond Green is going to be a player who's going to be coveted by NBA teams, but he shouldn't be coveted by the Memphis Grizzlies. I think the Grizzlies need to be going after a guy who's going to be 3-and-D, who's going to play small forward. The power forward position is secure. You don't need to get too fancy with this thing and go out and get Draymond Green and move Jaren to center or play Draymond extensively at small ball center. Because if you make that deal, more than likely Steven Adams is going to have to be involved in some way, shape, or form. And it doesn't make sense, because if Steven Adams is not involved, then what? You're going to bring Steven Adams off the bench? You're going to bring Draymond Green off the bench? Like, no. Why are we even entertaining this idea? I do not think Draymond Green is a fit in Memphis because Woj mentioned the Memphis Grizzlies. We have to entertain the idea of the possibility, but I do not think he's a fit in Memphis. The Grizzlies could find better help in other places and in the NBA. And speaking of better help, we're going to talk about better help in a second. And we're also going to talk about OG Anunoby. There was some other news as well on the trade rumor mill in terms of OG Anunoby. Maybe not the best news, but we're going to talk about that news. But before we get to that, I said we're going to talk about better help. We just talked about Draymond Green. The Grizzlies can get better help from other places, and you can get better help. All you have to do is go over to betterhelp.com/locked-on-NBA. Look, BetterHelp is required to have as an FTS disclosure, man. Because, look, here's the thing about BetterHelp. I try to tell people, look, in a given week, I spend so much time figuring out, look, it's easy to get caught up in what everyone else needs from you and never take a moment to think about what you need from yourself, right? But when we spend all our time giving, it can leave us feeling stretched thin. We're burned out. Therapy can give you the tools to find more balance in your life, so to keep supporting others, and that's where BetterHelp comes into play. Because if you've benefited from therapy before, feel free to share your experience as well. Because if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. So if you feel like, I like my therapist, but I don't love my therapist, you can switch. You can switch them. No additional charge. Find more balance in your life. The work-life balance is important for a lot of us, and family, whatever the balance may be for you. You got the best option here on Locked On Grizzlies. We're presenting you with BetterHelp. All you got to do is visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA. That'll get you 10% off on your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. It'll get you 10% off. Coming up on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to talk about OG Anunoby, one of the players that the Grizzlies should target, one of the players that the fan base wants the Grizzlies to target. But can the Grizzlies target him? Let's talk about that coming up on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back, everyone, to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host today, Damichael Cole. Going solo without my main man today, Joe Mullinax. He's off for a couple of days. Well-deserved break for Joe. And now you're stuck with me. And now we're stuck talking about OG Anunoby. We talked a lot about OG Anunoby, right? Talked about the 3-and-D profile. We talked about everything about this guy. We talked about this guy since the trade deadline. I remember during the trade deadline, we were having all the OG Anunoby conversations, and it all led us to the fact that Toronto wasn't going to budge easy on OG Anunoby. And Toronto has its reasons. I've kind of been stuck on this. OG Anunoby right now, you remember, he signed a 4-year contract for $72 million. He's going into this season, 2023, 2024. He will be in the 3rd year of that deal. You know what that means? Toronto can just sit back, kick its feet up, and say, hey, we don't got to trade this guy right now if we want to. We can trade him next summer. We can trade him February 2024. We could even trade him February 2025 at the trade deadline when, he's scheduled to be a free agent in the summer of 2025. Toronto has options. And if you know anything about Masai Ujiri and that regime, the front office over there, they're not going to get finessed too easily. You're not going to get over on the Toronto Raptors. People have joked and said, man, if Toronto, with the way they valued their players, you think they'd be a top 4 seed in the East. That's probably true. That's probably true. But at the end of the day, these players that people are interested in are champions. OG Anunoby won a championship. Pascal Siakam won a championship. But here's the thing. The latest reports around OG Anunoby are not good in terms of what most Grizzlies fans want to hear. I mentioned, the insider Mount Rushmore right now in current insiders. And one of the names I mentioned is Mark Stein. He has one of the best Substacks out there, and it's very informative. Mark Stein recently, in a recent Substack, touched on OG Anunoby, and he had some very interesting things to say, and I'm going to read it to you right here. He said, the Raptors' position on trading OG Anunoby, as described by one team interested in trying to acquire him, could be summed up as strong reluctance. Anunoby is generating tons of external trade interest, as we all know, as seen this time last year and again at the February trade deadline. But the signals so far suggest Toronto remains unwilling to part with the two-way swingman. Toronto remains unwilling to part with the two-way swingman. That stands out to me. That stands out to me because at the end of the day, if Toronto's unwilling to depart with OG at this stage, then that tells me that the price is higher than high. And one thing that Zach Kleiman has reiterated time and time again, the Grizzlies GM that is, Memphis isn't going to overpay. Memphis isn't going to, go above its means when it comes to acquiring these guys. Sure, they may view OG as a potential missing piece, but what I got from what Stein just said is a whole different perspective on when this deal potentially, even if it's not the Grizzlies, just when a deal for OG Anunoby overall could to take place. Because as he get closer to his contract ending, the value will go down a little bit unless he just has some season where he just breaks out and averages 25 points per game or something this year. But the value is probably going to go down a little bit. But here's the whole bigger picture thing of this. Maybe this will be worth an entire episode going forward on Locked On Grizzlies at some point. But because I think most of us can say OG right up there with guys like Mikal Bridges, who I think is pretty close to untouchable right now with the Nets. But he's in that top elite hierarchy where you say, if the Grizzlies get that guy, put him up against anybody in the West and let's see what happens. Acquiring OG Anunoby puts the Grizzlies in that position. But guess what? Now it's looking like that's unlikely to happen. So the Grizzlies have an interesting spot that they're in. They could go out and acquire guys to a tier below. We've talked about these guys extensively in the past. Last week, a couple weeks ago, I think Joe Monax had a crossover episode with the Nets where they talked about Royce O'Neal, Dorian Finney-Smith. I've talked about some other guys as well, like Robert Covington, plays a smaller role, in the Clippers. He's likely to get dealt because the Clippers just, quite frankly, don't use him for some reason. So you got all these other swingmen out there who can potentially step into a starting role and provide, a positive impact on the Grizzlies. But are those guys worth the potential cost? We've seen, Dorian Finney-Smith name be flirted with more than one first rounder in certain reports. But Here's my thing. I wouldn't be surprised because being around this Grizzlies front office for a while, this is kind of what I think could happen now after those latest OG Anunoby reports. And we'll dig deeper into this. Of course, I'll keep talking to people and see what I find out. But as of this moment, I think we cannot rule out the idea that Memphis will say, hey, fine, we'll start the season with one of our young guys at small forward. I know it's not what you want to hear, but we'll start the season with Zaire Williams, Jake LaRavia, or maybe even John Conchar. Taylor Jenkins loves John Conchar. Maybe even John Conchar starts at small forward. And then, as the season goes on, the Grizzlies will, ante up the talks with Toronto once again. Because at that point, Tyus Jones will be more, more tradable for the Grizzlies as the season goes on and you get closer to the 25-game suspension of John Morant being, filled up. So my point is, in short, if OG Anunoby isn't available, there's a very short list of guys that I'd probably be willing to trade Tyus Jones on now, considering the 25-game suspension with John Morant that we touched on. And since that's the case, I say, hey, you can still say we're going to trade Tyus Jones. Remember, because Tyus Jones will be on the last year of his contract, and the chances of Tyus Jones returning next season are very, very unlikely. The season after this upcoming season. Very unlikely because of the numbers. Won't make too much sense. The Grizzlies are going to have to pay Desmond Bane. So with that being said, you want to get value for Tyus Jones, but you may say, hey, let's play out these 25 games. Now you get the best of both worlds. Tyus Jones will keep the Grizzlies afloat. You're going to be probably using a small forward that you don't want to use going into the playoffs. So you still say, Tyus Jones goes out, he shows his starting point guard capabilities. You make a trade, send him potentially to Toronto, and maybe at that point, Toronto would be more willing to listen. And then again, the small forwards will be auditioning. If Zaire Williams gets the starting role and averages 12 points per game, or if Jake LaRavia, whoever that starting small forward ends up being, if one of those young guys stands out and shows promise, I think that helps as well. Now you're talking about trading two guys who were starting at the beginning of this upcoming season for OG Anunoby, and then you get Ja back, and then you're ready full bore for the postseason. So in a way, I think it kind of works for the Grizzlies if that's the route that they choose to take, the OG Anunoby route, that is. We know that there are other guys out there that the Grizzlies will be interested in pursuing at small forward. But we know, again, the elite tier for me is those guys like the Mikal Bridges and the OG Anunobys. And right now it's looking like neither of those guys can be acquired. Coming up on the Grizzlies, we're going to talk about a guy who possibly could be acquired in the NBA draft, and that's Duke's Dereck Lively. But before we get to that, I want to talk to you about Ibotta. Ibotta is one of our main sponsors here on Locked On Grizzlies. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying it out by using the code LOCKED when you register. Here's the thing about Ibotta. You can earn cash back on every shopping trip because Ibotta gives you cash back on hundreds of grocery items, from produce to personal care to pantry goods. All you got to do is link your loyalty account or upload your receipt after you shop, and you can get cash back. It's literally that simple. Look, a typical basket of groceries was $50 more expensive at the end of 22 than the beginning of the year due to inflation. You could earn 2.5 times that in cash back from Ibotta, or even more, depending on how you want to use it. Ibotta gives you real cash back. I'm not talking about points. I'm not talking about Kroger points and none of that stuff. Ibotta gives you real cash back. Other apps give you points that usually don't amount to much. It takes a bunch of points to build up, rewards. But with Ibotta, you get real cash back that you can cash out to your bank account, PayPal, or to gift cards. All you got to do right now, Ibotta is offering you listeners $5. $5, all you got to do just to try it out by using the code LOCKED when you register. All you have to do is go to the App Store or Google Play Store, download the free Ibotta app. That's Ibotta. The app, use the code LOCKED. Ibotta. It's in the Google Play Store, it's in the Apple Store, and use the promo code LOCKED. Coming up on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to talk about Dereck Lively as we get closer to the NBA draft here coming up on Thursday. Welcome back, everyone, to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host today, Damichael Cole, beat writer for the Commercial Appeal right here in Memphis, Tennessee. And look, we got to talk about all the angles here. We're talking about Draymond Green being a possibility for the Grizzlies because, quite frankly, free agency is approaching. We're talking about OG Anunoby trade rumors because we saw with the Suns and Bradley Beal, the trades are about to start happening. And the Grizzlies, because of the roster construction that we talked about 100 times at this point, the Grizzlies are probably going to need to move fast. So that's why we got to talk about the trade market. But we also got to talk about the NBA draft and where the Grizzlies stand. So we're talking about all the rumors and things like that. Last week, we talked about the idea of the Grizzlies moving up in the NBA draft. And if the Grizzlies were to move up in the NBA draft, there's one prospect that I say, hey, there's a guy in that late lottery, mid-first round, could be available for the Grizzlies. And that's Dereck Lively from Duke. If you watch Dereck Lively, or if you just remember the name, quite frankly, the name alone should ring bells because Dereck Lively was, a couple years ago, the number one player in his recruiting class. If Dereck Lively was able to jump from high school, I was talking to Jay Billis about this, so these aren't even my words. Jay Billis, ESPN's draft scout guru, one of the best in the business from that perspective. Jay Billis told me that Dereck Lively, straight out of high school, would have been a top 5 pick in the NBA draft. But he went to Duke. We saw some of the limitations there. One name that Jay Billis mentioned was DeAndre Jordan. He talked about how when DeAndre Jordan came out as a prospect, he was great defensively, known for his great rebounding coming out of Texas A&M, but he didn't have offense. He didn't have a post game, and that has carried him throughout the NBA. DeAndre Jordan is still in the NBA. In fact, DeAndre Jordan just won an NBA championship with the Denver Nuggets. That's the Dereck Lively profile. You go back to his college numbers at Duke, and they're not going to jump off the board to you. This is a guy who averaged 5 points, 5 rebounds per game, with the Duke Blue Devils. So it didn't really stand out, from that perspective in what he did for Duke. But where he did stand out is as a shot blocker. Over 2 blocks per game while playing, in low 20s in minutes per game. A couple of the names that I've seen thrown out from a comparison perspective. Again, I know Jay Billis mentioned him to me he mentioned DeAndre Jordan as a production perspective. But I've heard Willie Cauley-Stein as a potential comparison. But I've also heard Tyson Chandler. I think the Grizzlies would be hoping for Tyson Chandler if they were to move up in the draft and select Dereck Lively. Well, why does Dereck Lively make sense? Well, here's my thing. If the Grizzlies trade up, the Grizzlies trade down, the Grizzlies trade around, the Grizzlies trade draft wherever in the NBA draft this year, I am not expecting that player to be an immediate impact player in this rotation. Unless some injuries or whatever the case may be, something happens unexpected. I don't expect the Grizzlies to draft a guy who's going to be immediate rotation player off the jump. You know why? At point guard, you got John Morant. You got Tyus Jones. At shooting guard, you got Desmond Bain. You got Luke Kennard. At small forward, you got like 10,000 guys you've drafted in the last couple of years. David Roddy, Jake LaRavia, Zion Williams. Then you got John Conchar, you just gave an extension to last offseason, by the way. Then at power forward, you got Jaren Jackson Jr. You got Santi Aldama, who some people think can be a starter in the NBA eventually. Then at center, you got Steven Adams, one of the most steady centers in the game. You got Xavier Tillman, who you're probably going to pick up his team option very soon here. You got Brandon Clark, who just signed a nice extension, 4 years, more than $50 million last year. So the roster pretty much has a lot of stability. But you're talking about the Grizzlies, they got to start winning on the margins. And with Dereck Lively, there's an opportunity to say, hey, we draft this guy. We know for one, off at the very least, you're gonna get a guy who is gonna catch lobs, who's gonna block shots. He's switchable defensively, and he's gonna be a monster defensively. I mean, can you imagine a front court with Dereck Lively and Jaren Jackson Jr.? Jay Billets referred to him as a high floor player when we were talking, a player who has a high floor. Basically, you know what you're going to get defensively. At the very least, he is going to provide that. Remember, we said Willie Cauley-Stein plus. Like he's definitely going to give you a plus defense at the NBA level. Anything you get offensively from Dereck Lively is going to be a plus because, quite frankly, I don't expect him to do much other than dunk the basketball. Rebounding still remains to be seen how much more he can improve overall as a rebounder. The measurables are there. 7'1", 230 pounds right now. I think he has like a 7'4", 7'5" wingspan. I can't wait to see what he does. If he's drafted by a team like the Grizzlies, Memphis has the chance to put him in the developmental system here. Send him down to the hustle. Say, hey, sure, we know what you can do. Now let's see you. Work on your 3-point shot down here. Let's work on your, let's work on a hook shot. Let's work on a post move. Let's put you in a position to be more of an offensive factor for the Grizzlies going forward. And again, Steven Adams has 2 years left on his contract. I think if there's any position of point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward, center, if there's any position you want to draft for the future, I think center makes the most sense on this current roster. Again, if you want Dereck Lively, the Grizzlies are going to have to trade up to get him. This is a guy, he's going to go either in the late lottery, he's going to go in the middle of the first round. I don't expect him to be there at 25. If he's there, it's probably a no-brainer because, again, high floor player, makes a lot of sense. He adds to that rim running that the Grizzlies like. Remember, what makes Brandon Clark such a great fit alongside of Jaren Jackson Jr. is his ability, one, to switch on defense, and two, his ability to run to the rim. The Grizzlies set screens, and the pressure that Brandon Clark puts on the rims, he causes weak side defenders to come down. He causes help. It leads to easy corner three-pointers, more space for Jaren Jackson Jr., and that's why the net rating between those guys has been so good over the past, 3-4 seasons. Now, basically, with Dereck Lively, in my opinion, from the defensive standpoint, you're getting a jumbo-sized Brandon Clark. Offensively, you're not going to get the floater and things like that, the instant offense that Brandon Clark provides. But when Dereck Lively sets the screen and he beelines to the rim, guess what? There's going to be a lot of attention on it, especially if you got John Morant passing the ball or Desmond Bane or one of those guys. Dereck Lively makes sense to me as a potential draft prospect for the Grizzlies. What else makes sense? The Locked On NBA mock draft special, because it's here and it's bigger than ever. So follow along the entire first round in a 6-episode ultimate mock draft experience. Only Locked On can deliver. All episodes are available now on the Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So make sure you go check out the Locked On NBA mock draft special as well. And thank you for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies on today's episode. Tune in tomorrow as well, because we got much more to talk about. We're going to continue our draft coverage as we get one day closer to Thursday. And we're going to talk about some other rumors going on around the Grizzlies as well. Stay tuned for that. Again, this is going to be a jam-packed week. You're going to be with me again on tomorrow's edition. Joe will be off again on tomorrow. But we appreciate you for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies each and every week. And make sure you continue to find us everywhere, because guess what? We're free and available wherever you get your podcast. Once again, thank you for tuning in Locked On Grizzlies. I'm Damichael Cole. We'll see you next time on Locked On Grizzlies.